The Echoes of the Past. The Donor's Legacy. Chapter 1. The Knock on the Door. The Tuesday morning in Denver, Colorado, began like any other for Sarah Mitchell. 50 years old, a beloved English teacher at Northwood High, her life was a symphony of comforting routines, the scent of brewing coffee, the rhythmic rustle of newspaper pages, the quiet hum of her husband David's coding in his home office. Their 2 biological children were grown, charting their own paths in distant cities, leaving Sarah and David with a peaceful, well-ordered existence, a testament to their strong, decades-long marriage. Sarah was grading essays at the kitchen table, lost in the vivid imagery of a student's literary analysis, when the doorbell rang. It was an unexpected, insistent chime that cut through the morning's quietude. Usually, it was the mail carrier or a package delivery. She opened the door, a polite smile on her face. But the smile faltered, then vanished completely. Standing on her porch was a young woman, perhaps 25, with bright, intelligent eyes and a striking resemblance to David, her David. The same sharp jawline, the same thoughtful brow, even a faint dimple in her left cheek that mirrored his when he smiled. The young woman held out a hand, a nervous but determined tremor in her voice. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Emily Vance. I believe your husband, David Mitchell, is my biological father." The words struck Sarah with the force of a physical blow. The quiet, ordered world she had built, the very foundations of her understanding of her life and her marriage, began to crack. Her breath caught in her throat. Emily, sensing Sarah's shock, continued, her voice softening slightly. "I found him through a DNA test and a genetic genealogy website. It matched me to him. I know this must be a shock, a complete surprise, and I apologize for appearing out of nowhere. But my mother, she has a very rare genetic illness. It's progressing, and we need to understand its full genetic profile. We need to know my biological father's family medical history. It's critical. It could affect my own health, and we're desperate for any information that might help find a treatment for my mom." Sarah could only stare, her mind reeling. Biological father? David? She knew everything about David. His childhood in Boulder, his passion for old sci-fi movies, his quiet ambition. But this was an uncharted territory, a complete blank in the tapestry of their shared life. Just then, David, alerted by the unusual silence, emerged from his office, a questioning look on his face. He saw Emily, and his own face, usually so calm, paled. His eyes widened, a flicker of something Sarah couldn't quite decipher. Recognition? Fear? Crossing them. He looked from Emily to Sarah, then back to Emily, his lips parting in a silent gasp. "David Mitchell?" Emily asked, her voice laced with a tremor of hope and uncertainty. David, his voice barely a whisper, replied, Yes, that's me." He looked utterly shell-shocked. "I'm Emily," she repeated, her gaze direct, unwavering. "I believe you were a sperm donor about 25 years ago at the University of Colorado Clinic in Boulder." David's shoulders slumped. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if trying to reorient himself in a suddenly unfamiliar reality. Then he opened them, looking directly at Sarah, a profound guilt etched onto his features. "Sarah," he said, his voice raw, I was, when I was in college, desperate for money. It was anonymous. I thought it was completely anonymous, and long forgotten." The words hung in the crisp morning air, heavy with unspoken implications. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. Anonymous. Forgotten. But here she stood, a living, breathing testament to a past David had kept hidden. A secret she had never known. Her David, the man she loved, the foundation of her world, had a secret child, or children. The implication was staggering. And Emily, polite but firm, was only the first ripple in what promised to be a tsunami. Her orderly life, her peaceful Tuesday, had just been irrevocably shattered. Chapter 2: The Echoes of Youth. The front door closed, but the silence inside the Mitchell home was deafening, thicker than any argument. Sarah turned to David, her gaze a mixture of hurt, confusion, and betrayal. "A sperm donor, David?" she asked, her voice tight, barely above a whisper. 25 years ago? Why have I never known about this? David ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, his face pale, his eyes wide with a combination of guilt and utter bewilderment. "Sarah, I never thought it would come to this. It was so long ago, a different lifetime. I was a broke college kid, desperate for cash. The clinic was offering a decent sum. It was just a way to pay for books, for rent. It was advertised as completely anonymous. They assured us. I signed papers. I genuinely believed it was a one-time thing, a medical transaction, and that was that. It never occurred to me that anyone would ever trace it, that anyone would ever show up on our doorstep." Sarah felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. "But you never told me, not in 30 years, not when we were dating, not when we got married, not when we had our own children. You never thought to mention that you might have other children out there? Because they weren't children to me." "Sarah," David retorted, his voice rising, a note of desperation in it. "They were a hypothetical, a possibility, a medical donation. It was abstract, and it was anonymous. I never had any intention of being a father to them. I was told I wouldn't be. I was assured of it. It was sealed." He sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I truly am. I never meant to deceive you. It never seemed relevant. It was before you. It was a mistake, a moment of youthful desperation. And I was so sure it would never follow me." Sarah walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawn, seeing nothing but the ghost of Emily's face. The betrayal stung, sharp and immediate. Yet beneath it, a complex tapestry of emotions began to unfurl. Empathy for the young, struggling college student David had been, fear for their future, and a dawning understanding of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their lives. Emily had left a small, neatly typed card with her contact information. Emily Vance, University of Colorado Medical School, student representative. Please call when you're ready. She needs medical information, David, Sarah said, turning back to him, her voice calmer now, but laced with an unyielding resolve. Her mother is sick. This isn't about paternity claims or breaking up our family. This is about a young woman seeking answers that could save a life, yours or hers. You have to talk to her. David lifted his head, his eyes haunted. I know, I will. But what do we tell the kids? What about our lives? The conversation stretched into the night, a raw, painful excavation of David's past and the unforeseen consequences of a decision made in anonymity. He revealed the details, the clinic in Boulder, the rigorous screening process, the promise of a few $100s per donation. He remembered little else. Only the overwhelming need for money to stay in school. Just as they were reaching a fragile truce, a new understanding of their predicament. The doorbell chimed again, It was early afternoon, 2 days later. Sarah's heart sank. This time, she wasn't surprised by the knock. She simply felt a grim inevitability. Standing on the porch was a young man, perhaps 23, with the same sharp jawline and thoughtful brow as David, but with a wilder cascade of dark hair and an artistic air. He held a guitar case, its worn leather telling tales of countless gigs. "Hi," he said, a nervous but hopeful smile on his face. "Is this the Mitchell residence? I'm Jake. Jake Miller. And I think David Mitchell might be my biological father." He shifted, then added, "Emily told me about you. We matched on the same DNA site. She thought I should come." Sarah opened the door wider, a weary sigh escaping her lips. 2. In less than a week. The anonymous past was no longer anonymous. It was a tangible, growing reality, standing on her doorstep, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that Jake wouldn't be the last. Chapter 3. The Doctor's Ledger. The arrival of Jake, with his musician soul and clear desire for paternal connection, escalated the situation from a contained medical inquiry to a full-blown existential crisis for David and Sarah. Two distinct personalities, both bearing David's indelible mark, now represented a burgeoning, unknown aspect of his life. "This is getting out of hand, David," Sarah said one evening after Jake had left, leaving behind a lingering scent of patchouli and the echo of his earnest questions. "Two of them? What if there are more?" David, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since Jake's arrival, looked up, his eyes filled with a dawning realization. "There probably are. The clinic was busy. I donated a lot." He paused, then continued, his voice strained. "I have to go back there, to the clinic. I need to find out everything." The University of Colorado campus in Boulder hadn't changed much in 30 years, but the small, discreet clinic where David had been a donor was gone. The building now housed a university administrative office. His heart sank. All records, all promises of anonymity, swallowed by time. Determined, David began asking around, making discreet inquiries with retired university staff. It was a long shot, but he knew he couldn't give up. After several frustrating dead ends, an old administrative assistant vaguely remembered that a Dr. Evelyn Reed, who had managed the donor program, had retired a few years prior and lived quietly in a small town outside of Fort Collins. David, accompanied by a hesitant Sarah, drove north. Dr. Evelyn Reed's home was a charming cottage surrounded by a vibrant garden. She was a woman in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a sharp, intelligent gaze. She invited them in, her curiosity piqued by their nervous demeanor. David, his voice faltering at first, explained the situation. Emily, Jake, the DNA matches, the desperate need for information. He brought out his old donor ID number, a faded slip of paper he'd kept in a forgotten wallet. Dr. Reed listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When David finished, she sighed, a long, weary sound. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, her voice gentle. "I retired from that clinic because I grew weary of the ethical compromises, the promise of anonymity. It was always a fragile one. Even back then, we knew in our hearts that with advances in genetic mapping, it wouldn't last forever, but it was the standard practice." She paused, then walked to an old wooden filing cabinet in her study. "I kept certain records. Not all, mind you. But I believed that one day, These children, these incredibly valuable individuals, might want to know their origins, and that the donors themselves might need to understand the profound impact of their generosity. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age. "You were donor 47B, Mr. Mitchell. One of our most popular donors, I recall." She flipped through the pages, her finger tracing entries. High IQ, excellent physical health, no history of genetic disease in your family, athletic, artistic leanings. You were highly sought after. David felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. How many? How many children? Dr. Reed looked up, her gaze steady. Over a 5-year period, Mr. Mitchell, you made 73 donations. We generally limited the number of pregnancies per donor to a maximum of 10 to 15 in a region to avoid potential issues down the line. But your profile was so desirable and demand was high. I estimate conservatively between 8 and 12 successful pregnancies. Maybe more if some families went to other clinics with your samples after the first successful pregnancy. 8 to 12, maybe more. The numbers hit David with the force of a physical blow. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Not 2, not 3, a dozen children, all carrying David's genetic blueprint. His legacy, out there in the world, unknown, unacknowledged. The clinic was closed down due to a funding shortfall, not scandal. Dr. Reed continued, seeing their shock. But the ethical debates were growing louder. The promise of lifelong anonymity, it felt increasingly like a lie we were telling ourselves and our donors. She then looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this is incredibly difficult for you, but these young people, they are seeking answers. Medical answers, yes, but also identity, a sense of belonging, a piece of themselves." As if on cue, the next wave arrived. Later that week, while David and Sarah were still reeling from Dr. Reed's revelations, 2 more knocks on the door. First, Jessica, 30 years old, a sharp, composed lawyer from Boston, who had traced David independently through a commercial DNA kit. She was methodical, articulate, and seeking not just medical data, but a deeper understanding of her identity, the genetic tapestry that made her who she was. She spoke of a feeling of otherness throughout her life, a subtle disconnect that she now understood was the absence of a known biological father. Then Sam, 20 years old, quiet and contemplative, a college student grappling with depression and a pervasive feeling of rootlessness. He'd found David through a distant cousin match and was less interested in medical facts than in simply finding someone, anyone, who shared his unique genetic heritage. He was looking for a sense of belonging, a connection in a world that often felt overwhelming. 4 of them, Emily, Jake, Jessica, Sam, each unique, each carrying a piece of David, and each knocking on their door, demanding acknowledgement, demanding answers, demanding a place in a family that had no idea they existed until a few weeks ago. The orderly life of Sarah and David Mitchell was not just shattered, it was exploding, reforming into a complex, unpredictable, and profoundly challenging new reality. Chapter 4: The Artist's Shadow. The Mitchell home, once a sanctuary of quiet predictability, was now a bustling hub of unexpected family. 4 young adults, each with David's eyes or his thoughtful brow, moved through their living room, their presence a constant, vibrant reminder of a past David had believed sealed away. Sarah navigated this new reality with a mix of emotional turmoil and steely resolve. The initial shock had given way to a strange, almost maternal curiosity. She found herself studying their gestures, their expressions, searching for echoes of David, and surprisingly, finding hints of themselves too, unique and compelling. David, on the other hand, was a closed book. He provided the medical information Emily desperately needed for her mother, answering questions about his family history of heart disease and blood pressure with clinical detachment. But when it came to personal connection, he retreated. He was polite, even kind, but emotionally distant, as if grappling with an immense, unspoken burden. He found it easier to discuss medical predispositions than to acknowledge the deep human longing in their eyes. Emily's mother, Karen, was deteriorating rapidly, her rare genetic illness accelerating its insidious progress. The urgency of their quest for medical history became palpable, casting a shadow over their fragile new dynamic. Emily, exhausted and anxious, pushed for comprehensive genetic testing for David, hoping for a breakthrough, a missing piece that could aid in her mother's treatment. One afternoon, while the donor children were gathered, sharing stories of their lives, their separate upbringings, and their mutual quest, a faint, almost forgotten memory flickered in David's mind. Dr. Reed's words, artistic leanings, it was true. In college, before the practical demands of engineering consumed him, David had harbored a secret passion for painting. He'd even taken a few art classes, dreaming of a life of vibrant canvases and creative expression. But the need for financial stability, the pressure to conform, had quietly suffocated that dream. He hadn't touched a paintbrush in decades. Later, in a private conversation, Dr. Reed shared more with Sarah. You know, there was another donor 347, who was remarkably similar to David's profile, but he had a distinct artistic streak. He used to doodle on his intake forms. I remember one form, he sketched a tiny, detailed azalea flower, and next to it wrote, "If only I could paint these all day." David, did you ever have an interest in art? Sarah's eyes widened. She remembered an old, dust-covered sketchbook David kept hidden in the back of his closet, filled with intricate, almost architectural landscapes. He did. He loved to draw, to paint. He gave it up after college. Dr. Reed smiled sadly. Many of our donors were brilliant young minds, full of dreams, forced to make practical choices. Sometimes, the donations were the only way they could pursue their education. It's a profound irony, isn't it? To give life, but perhaps stifle a part of your own in the process. This conversation planted a seed in Sarah's mind. She saw Jake's guitar, his soulful lyrics, as a mirror of David's suppressed artistic self. She saw Emily's relentless pursuit of medical knowledge as a reflection of David's precise, analytical mind. And she began to wonder if David's resistance to fully embracing these children was not just about the shock, but about confronting the parts of himself he had abandoned long ago. The internal conflicts within the Mitchell family were simmering. Their own biological children, Alex and Chloe, had learned of the situation. Alex, a pragmatist like his father, was initially wary, concerned about the potential for financial claims and disruption. Chloe, more empathetic, was fascinated, curious to meet her half-siblings. Their differing reactions added another layer of tension to the household. One evening, Emily came to David, her face etched with exhaustion and fear. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking, "Mom's gotten worse. The doctors are saying we're running out of time. We need your full genetic profile, not just the family history, a full panel. It's the only way to potentially understand the nuances of her mutation. Please." The plea was undeniable. David, seeing the raw desperation in her eyes, finally relented. He agreed to undergo the extensive genetic testing. The decision, though medically driven, was a crack in his carefully constructed emotional wall. As the days turned into weeks, waiting for the test results, an unexpected dynamic began to emerge among Emily, Jake, Jessica, and Sam. Despite their vastly different personalities and life paths, they found solace and a strange kind of kinship in each other. They were a unique family, bound by a shared biological father, navigating the unprecedented terrain of their existence. They shared stories of their childhoods, compared quirks they realized they shared with David, and supported each other through the emotional roller coaster of their collective search for identity. Jake played his guitar for them, his lyrics often reflecting the yearning for connection. Jessica, the lawyer, began to meticulously research the evolving laws around donor anonymity, not for herself, but for the ethical implications for future generations. Sam, the quietist, found an unexpected voice, sharing his philosophical musings on identity and belonging, finding an audience that truly understood his questions. David, observing these interactions from a distance, began to see them not as intruders but as reflections. He saw his own intellect in Emily's sharp mind, his own quiet artistic yearning in Jake's music, his own methodical nature in Jessica's precision, and perhaps a vulnerability he rarely showed in Sam's search for meaning. The anonymity, the carefully constructed distance he had maintained from his past was slowly, irrevocably crumbling. The echoes were growing louder, demanding not just medical data, but recognition, connection, and a place in the complex tapestry of his life. Chapter 5: The Unfolding Legacy. The results of David's comprehensive genetic testing arrived, a thick envelope that felt heavier than its contents. Emily, her face pale with a mixture of hope and trepidation, sat with David and Sarah as they opened it. The news was bittersweet. David did not carry the exact rare genetic mutation that was ravaging Emily's mother, Karen. A wave of profound disappointment washed over Emily. However, the report revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle. David did carry a predisposition for a different, less severe but chronic autoimmune condition, a subtle genetic marker that had been present in some of his distant relatives but had remained dormant in him. This information, though not a cure, provided invaluable data for Emily's mother's doctors, helping them understand how the broader genetic landscape might be impacting Karen's unique mutation and offering pathways for more targeted, preventative care for Emily herself. It wasn't the miracle they'd hoped for, but it was a critical step forward. Emily, though disheartened, was immensely grateful. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice filled with a raw sincerity. "Thank you for doing this. This information, it's a gift." The medical crisis, though not fully resolved, had created an undeniable bond, a shared vulnerability that chipped away at David's remaining emotional walls. The conversation shifted from clinical data to something more personal, more human. David, clearing his throat, looked at Emily, then at Sarah, and finally at the door where he knew Jake, Jessica, and Sam were waiting. "There's something else," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "Something I haven't fully acknowledged." He recounted his youthful passion for painting, the quiet dream he had suppressed for decades. He spoke of the guilt he carried, not just for the donor secret, but for abandoning a part of himself. He looked at Jake, his eyes softening. "Jake, when I hear your music, I hear a part of myself I lost, a part I regret losing." Later that week, David and Sarah, after countless hours of difficult, honest conversation, made a momentous decision. they would embrace this new, complex reality. They organized a family gathering, inviting Emily, Jake, Jessica, and Sam, along with their partners and, crucially, Alex and Chloe, their biological children. The air in the Mitchell home was thick with anticipation, a mix of nervousness and a fragile hope. The gathering began awkwardly, a collection of strangers bound by an unseen thread. But as David, visibly nervous but determined, began to speak, the tension slowly eased. He recounted his story, not just the clinical details of his donor past, but the emotional truth of it, the financial desperation, the naivety, the belief in anonymity, and the profound, unexpected impact of seeing them all now. He spoke of his guilt for not telling Sarah, for the decades of silence. Then Sarah spoke, her voice warm and clear, her hand resting on David's arm. She confessed her initial shock, her feelings of betrayal, her fear for their established life. But then she looked at each of the young adults, her eyes filled with a new, blossoming affection. "But seeing all of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "seeing your faces, hearing your stories, you are extraordinary. You are a part of David's life, a part of our life now. This isn't what we expected. This isn't how we imagined our empty nest. But it's something truly remarkable. And we want to know you, all of you." Tears flowed, hugs were exchanged. Alex and Chloe, observing their parents' raw honesty and the genuine connection forming, began to shed their own reservations. Alex, ever practical, started discussing potential family meetups and genetic health trees. Chloe, her eyes shining, instantly connected with Jake over music, and with Jessica over their shared love for debate. Over the following months, the chaos slowly began to resolve into a new, expanded form of family. Emily, armed with David's genetic information, was able to help her mother, Karen, manage her illness more effectively, giving them precious, quality time. Emily also started a support group for other donor-conceived individuals, using her newfound knowledge and connections to advocate for greater transparency in the donor industry. Jake, inspired by David's concession of his artistic dreams, found new depths in his music. He began writing songs that explored themes of identity, belonging, and the unexpected ways families form. He found a mentor in David, who, to Sarah's delight, retrieved his old paints and brushes, tentatively returning to his long-abandoned canvas. The engineer discovered a vibrant new palette of colors, finding unexpected joy and solace in expressing the complex emotions of his unfolding legacy. Jessica, the lawyer, driven by her own search for identity, found a powerful new purpose. She channeled her analytical mind into advocating for donor-conceived individuals' rights, working pro bono on cases that sought access to medical and genealogical information. She found not just her biological father, but a cause, a mission that resonated deeply with her sense of justice. Sam, the youngest who had felt lost and rootless, found an anchor. He discovered a sense of belonging in this unexpectedly large, diverse family. He spent hours with David, talking about philosophy, life, and the strange twists of fate. He found guidance and unconditional acceptance, a sense of roots he had always craved. Sarah, initially so threatened by the invasion of her ordered life, found herself transformed. She saw the beauty in this unexpected expansion of her family, in the love that grew out of shock and uncertainty. Her world hadn't been shattered. It had simply expanded, becoming richer, more complex, and infinitely more fulfilling. She embraced these young adults, these unexpected children of David, not as burdens, but as gifts, each bringing their own unique light into their lives. The echoes of David's past once a silent, unsettling whisper, had become a symphony of new lives, new connections, and a profound, unfolding legacy of love and acceptance. The Mitchell family, once a well-defined unit, had become a vibrant, sprawling tapestry, woven with threads of biology, chance, and the extraordinary power of the human heart to embrace the unexpected.